Okay. Hello, everybody. This is my first time making a pre-recorded Zoom video, so if it seems like I don't know what I'm doing, that's because I don't. But I wanted to make class seem as much like a normal class as possible for the days that I'm gone. So today, what that means is I'm just gonna go over pretty briefly with you the PowerPoint that we would normally use in class, which is going over chapter 15. I'm just gonna read through it like I normally do. We won't get to have as much of a discussion today, but when I come back, we will have a thorough conversation about chapter 15. And also you will be asked to kind of use chapter 15 the rest of the semester. So please make sure you're paying attention today, taking notes how you normally do. And I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and get started with this. It is, as always, uploaded to the home screen module page on Canvas. So this one would be under module 15. That is the PowerPoint that I'm going over today. Okay. All right. Hopefully this is visible. So chapter 15 talks about population, immigration, and urbanization. So before we dive into the chapter, really quickly, I just want to kind of look over some definitions that will be useful for us to have front and center in our brain as we learn and discuss this today. So demography is the study of human populations. And demographics specifically are going to refer to data relating to the population and those particular groups within it. If you remember, like I normally say, italicized words mean that they could be on the final, so please take note of that. Just going to ask you what demographics are. So those are going to be all of that data that refers to the population. Okay. I want to say capiche to you all, but I can't hear you capiche, so hopefully you're capiching in your seats. Urbanization, another important definition for today. Urbanization is a social process where the population is going to shift from the country into the cities, and those people are going to start living in urban areas rather than rural areas. Immigration is our last important definition, which is the movement of people from one nation to another. So we're going to start just talking about population. I wanted to kind of give you a brief idea of why we have to talk about population in sociology. So, as I hope you all know by now, sociology is the study of people and places and society and why we do things, okay? So studying population in sociology is, of course, important because it's going to talk about the basic features of a society's people and how that impacts social life. So population pressures are going to be the pressures that happen in poor societies with low population densities, where there is an advantage to population growth because the extra people can be put to work and therefore be productive members of that society. But on the other hand, when populations grow too fast, agricultural technologies cannot keep up always, and then there can be environmental issues. And these environmental issues we're going to go over in detail when we have our climate chapter, but those can look like anything from an excess of carbon dioxide to lead poisoning to water filtration issues, etc. Okay. Just for a moment here, before we go into urbanization, I want to talk to you all about the demographic divide. So the demographic divide is a general pattern of population growth where poor countries have higher birth rates and lower life expectancies, and wealthier countries have lower birth rates and higher life expectancies. So this is going to be a very significant cause of inequality. These high growth countries have higher levels of poverty. Typically, they have lower levels of literacy. They rely on agriculture for their economy, and they have little manufacturing. So there is a divide in between these different countries and nations that can therefore cause this inequality that we are looking at in terms of this demographic divide. Okay. All right. Urbanization. I think we've, kind of touched on this. I know it's brought up in history as well. So I wanted to just give you kind of a little table synopsis here of what urbanization is in sociology. And these two scholars that I have listed up here are two of the main ones that not only your textbook talks about, but also that are very prominent urban sociologists. And so they offer some of the richest arguments of urbanization and describing what cities are. So Frank Lloyd Wright, he absolutely hated cities. He thought they were poorly designed, they were too crowded, too noisy, too busy. So he believed there should be more rural areas, and those rural areas would have commerce, agriculture, and recreation all separated. Jane Jacobs is the exact opposite. So she argued that cities were the most exciting places to live. It was all these different people doing all these different things. Picture the classic examples of New York City that you see online. There's everything going on all at once, okay? So this is why Jane Jacobs loved it, but this is also why Frank Lloyd Wright hated it, okay? So they have very differing opinions. And what I want you to think about with these scholars and their opinions are these different theories of urbanization that I've listed up here. So some urban sociologists saw the city as a place of opportunity. Some saw it as a place of insecurity. And this is tricky because there's no standard definition of an urban area or of an urban population, because each country has its own definition of who is an urban resident. So this is going to be a critical point of study in sociology, and it continues to be, because we need to continue to think about how the concentration of people in cities is impacting social structures. Some of these impacts are crime rates, different resources, different things that families get, etc. So all of those things that are impacted by these various theories of urbanization. And again, going back to these scholars, Frank Lloyd Wright and Jane Jacobs, they would have different points of arguing why these things are happening in the cities, depending on if they like the ideas of cities or not. Okay, so briefly here, we're going to talk a little bit about suburbs and exurbs. So a suburb is a residential area located within commuting distance of a city. An exurb are typically some sort of commuter towns on the outer fringes of an urban area. So exurbs are going to be closer to 50 miles or more away from the city, but suburbs are going to be a little bit closer. You can commute to the city from where you live. So one of the most influential suburbs in the US in our history is Levittown, which was in New York. Levittown was a planned community on Long Island. It was built between 1947 and 1951. So I'm going to play just a little bit of this clip for you all and for us right now. And afterwards, we're going to talk about this question here. Hopefully, I have to make sure you can hear that sound. Hopefully you can.
White picket fences, clipped hedges, well-maintained lawns. From the outside, it looks like the American dream. But what the community of Levittown was built on doesn't include all Americans.
The builder Levitt had in his deeds something that said this property can only be sold to Caucasian people. Now, we have to remember Those deeds were approved by the federal government.
Dolores and Erwin Quintine experienced this government-approved racist policy firsthand when they went looking for a home in Levittown in the 1960s.
The guy said, you knows what you get your out of here because we don't sell the.
Established 1947, but how Levittown was established has an effect on American culture today, not just in Levittown, but nationwide. William Levitt built the first mass-produced suburb in the country, and what happened in this 17,000 home development set the standard for thousands of communities coast to coast.
The only way that Levitt could build that subdivision was by going to the Federal Housing Administration and the Veterans Administration, getting a bank guarantee for the loans to buy the land and build the homes.
But the banks blocked out in red on maps neighborhoods that had even one Black person living there and refused to make loans there. It's why Levittown said no to Black buyers at all.
We went to the office where the gentleman was showing the houses. So my husband said to him, my wife and I interested in, purchasing a home in Levittown. He said, get your out of here.
Richard Rothstein is one of the foremost researchers on housing discrimination in the US.
The federal government even required Levitt to place a clause in the deed of every home in Levittown prohibiting resale to African Americans or rental to African Americans. Those deeds are still in the homes today. They can't be removed.
They're no longer enforceable, but there it is, not to permit the premises to be used or occupied by any person other than members of the Caucasian race. Louise Casano has lived in Levittown since her parents brought her here in 1951, and she and her husband bought their home here 13 years later.
I don't doubt that a number of people bought into the community for the reason that it was Caucasian only. I have never heard of any incidents in this community where people of color have been abused in any way.
But there may be a reason for that. Even today, just over 1% of Levittown residents are Black, just under 84% are white.
That's the problem with discrimination and racism. It carries forward.
When Levitt built his homes, there was no down payment for veterans, and for anyone else, it was $10. That's just $120 today, adjusted for inflation. And the homes cost about $8,000, the equivalent of $96,000 of today's dollars. Prices Black families could afford. But now, the value of a Levittown home?
$500,000 perhaps. The white families gained equity.
Housing advocate Ian Wilder says that created a huge divide of wealth.
Which could be used to put children through school, which means through college, which means those children have a shot at a better paying job. The families that couldn't buy here lost $400,000 worth of equity.
That segregation, enforced by the government and kept in place to this day, means that most whites have lived separately from Blacks for generations. Now, there were a few exceptions in the years after World War II. Well, sort of. Madeline Quintine shows us the clippings about her dad, a community leader. He was the man run out of Levittown nearly 60 years ago.
My father was about home ownership.
Erwin Quintine was finally able to buy a home here in Roanoke Park. The North Amityville subdivision, 4 miles from Levittown, advertised that all men are created equal.
It's basically where African Americans live.
And while they did build up equity, it was separate and unequal. North Amityville is now 92% Black or Latino and has a median income of about $73,500. That's 62 cents for each dollar Levittowners earn. So
Okay, so I'm gonna just stop it here in the interest of time and to make sure we have time to chat about this. So the reason I play this video is not only because this place still exists and because it is one of the most famous suburbs in the US, and we're talking about suburbs, but as you all know, we talk about discrimination and have these hard conversations every day about race and gender and class. So I want us to kind of think about those conversations we have in the context of this suburb that was made to only allow a certain race in the particular suburb. So that being said, my main question is, why is this problematic, or is it problematic to have a suburb that only Caucasian people are allowed to live in? That is my question for you all. I want you to think about that. I will not make you group up, but I know sometimes you like to chat with your partners or the people around you. I would love for you all to have an open conversation about this. And I'm gonna give you a second / hopefully you can pause me. If not, I'll just be quiet for a minute. So go ahead and talk about this and then we'll continue on. Okay, I realized that I think you can pause me if I upload this correctly. So if you can't, go back and talk about it after. But we're gonna move forward and hopefully I did this in some sort of correct way. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again and get through the rest of this. Finish up here. Okay. All right. So we're going to continue on this conversation a little bit more about urbanization, but now kind of taking it outside of the US and looking a little bit more at it globally. So global cities and urbanization in the developing world are going to look a little bit different. There are global cities, which are cities that serve as the centers of finance, law, management counseling, and consulting, and global markets, and all kinds of those communications. So these are those huge cities that you think of: Tokyo, New York City, LA, all of those are global cities, okay? So these cities contribute to and also reinforce privilege and inequality. One of the main ways that they do that is through housing inequality. So housing is a financial investment, as we all know, which has led to accelerated costs and builders reducing their investments in affordable housing. So there are not as many people giving to and building affordable housing, which means that not as many low-income people are able to live in these cities. Therefore, they're being pushed out in some places. So urbanization has been associated with economic development and innovation, but this is not the case all over our planet, and it's not the case in the developing world. So there is what sociologists call brain drain, which is when people, highly educated people, want to leave their countries that they came from, those lower income countries, and go to places with more economic opportunity. So they are leaving to get education, but then they stay in that bigger city, which means that there are less people getting education and fair education in those lower income countries. Okay, and I know I'm not there to answer questions if some of this doesn't make sense, so please write down if you have a question, email me after, or if you jot it down, I'd be happy to answer it as soon as you email me or as soon as I get back. Capiche? Capiche? Okay. So the last part of this little chapter here and presentation here is immigration. So immigration in the US is an extremely important topic because the US describes itself as a nation of immigrants. In terms of the numbers and statistics, about 1/5 of all international migrants currently live in the US. So this has been one of the top immigrant destinations in the world since the 60s. The pace of migration went up during the 18th century, where most of the people migrating were migrating internally, which means they are moving in between the same country. Again, if we're thinking about people moving from rural areas into cities, with industrialization and urbanization, those people are going to move from the rural areas to urban areas in search of better economic opportunities. Okay. In terms of immigrant communities, there is something that sociologists call immigrant enclaves. So an immigrant enclave is a community where there are successful immigrant-owned businesses that really anchor the community and the people there. So there are tons and tons of examples of these. Some of the most prevalent or popular that I thought of are Little Havana in Miami, Koreatown in New York City. Again, just a couple examples. Please think of some on your own if you can think of any. So not all of these immigrant communities are successful enclaves. So even though they do usually host a number of successful businesses, some immigrants are forced into these communities and into poorly paid jobs. And then also, not only is there these poorly paid jobs, but there's racial discrimination, which can force people into dangerous neighborhoods with less resources, less education, less jobs. Another important feature of immigrant communities is remittances. So remittances are when immigrants send money back to family members living in their country of origin. So all of these examples here and this kind of conversation we're having right now is leading up to the section of the book in class where we're going to talk about and think about the politics of immigration. So in democratic societies, which the US claims to be, employers have been one of the most influential interest groups that advocate for higher levels of immigration. So there are people who advocate for immigrants and try to help them and boost them, but there are also anti-immigrant movements. So these have occurred throughout our entire history. In the US, they have occurred all the way from back to the 1770s with Benjamin Franklin, all the way to now in 2016 with Donald Trump. And both of these people, these prevalent leaders in our country, have argued against immigration. So because of this, because we have such differing views, we have these anti-immigrant groups, these pro-immigrant groups, because of this, sociologists have started to look into factors that would cause someone to be in one of these anti-immigrant movements. So racial and ethnic prejudice is a significant factor that motivates this. And then also going past the aspect of racial and ethnic prejudice is the perception that there is an economic threat from immigrant communities. So that is just a little bit about the politics of immigration. To kind of wrap that up, I have one more slide here about those immigrant rights groups. And these have been on the rise. They are attempting to and succeeding in a lot of groups to achieve political success and influence public opinion positively about immigration. So public opinion research shows that attitudes towards immigrants have become more supportive. And this study was specifically in California. And this is a research that was done over the last 30 years. As always, for those really specific statistics that I throw at you during class, these can be traced back to the book. I apologize for this one that I didn't put a page number, but this specific study was discussed at the end of the chapter. Okay, so I do just have one more question for you all, and this is the end of the video. So I hope you all have written down if you have any questions. I want you to just, again, talk with those people around you. We won't make you get into groups. You're welcome. But talk to your partner, talk to the people around you. If you don't want to do that, you are always welcome to sit individually, but please jot down what you're thinking. So for this, I just want you to think about what is all involved in the process of becoming a US citizen. Does it seem easy? Does it seem difficult? Just explain what you found. And so this is the part of class where I encourage you to either get on your laptop and use your textbook, or get on your laptop to look up this research that I'm asking you to do. So please do this. You are not required to turn anything in for this, but you are required to speak out loud about what you find. So do so, and thank you all for listening, and be good.